incredibly rugged and beautiful collection of jagged volcanic peaks carved into interesting shapes and spires by glaciers. My friends, we're approaching a fantastic stretch of road that really demonstrates the power of glaciers. So let's talk a little bit about how the Beartooth Mountains were formed. Somewhere between 40 and 70 million years ago, a massive block of metamorphic rock pushed its way up many thousands of feet from a major thrust fault. This was the same general mountain-building event that created much of the Rocky Mountains.
Wow, look at that.
The mountains were being uplifted, sedimentary rocks such as sandstone and shale from the top of the plateau were eroded, and that sediment was deposited into lower drainage basins. Prior to this uplift event, much of the Rocky Mountains were underwater, and as the inland sea retreated, the basins still held water. As that softer sedimentary rock eroded from the tops of the rising mountains, it also buried plants and other organic matter in those swampy basin waters. Over millions of years, this decomposing plant matter was heated and compressed by the weight of all the layers that formed above. That, of course, created the rich coal beds that lured the first wave of European settlers into the area in the first place. As we heard, while most of the sedimentary rock was eroded from the top of the uplifted rock, the much harder and more erosion-resistant rocks were revealed. These consist of granites, gneiss, and crystalline schists, and are thought to be as old as 4 billion years old, making the Beartooths home to some of the oldest rocks on Earth. It's the glaciers who are the artists in this story. As they expanded, moving under the force of gravity, then retreated in multiple cycles, they carved the many outcroppings and depressions in the bedrock that are now lakes. Without the amazing stone-shaping forces of glaciers, the Beartooth Mountains wouldn't be much to look at. They'd most likely just be a rounded blob of high-elevation rock.
They are incredible. Actually starting to clear up a little bit more. we climb up to that snowbank. Guess it'll be a
At the
turnout
peak
up
of
here.
the Ice Age, glaciers covered almost everything you can see from here. Pilot Peak, that very striking pointy peak you hopefully got a good look at, is actually a glacial horn. When three or more glaciers erode from each other, they leave a very dramatic pyramidal peak at its junction. In order to qualify as a true glacial horn, the peak must have at least three sheer faces. The Matterhorn in the Swiss Alps is probably the most famous example of a glacial horn, and the Grand Teton and Canada's Mount Assiniboine are other similarly carved peaks. By some estimates, a couple of hundred small glaciers and perennial snowfields still exist in the Beartooths, although they are rapidly melting too. One of the most notable and well-studied is the Grasshopper Glacier, and it has quite a fascinating story. The glacier sits at just over 11,000 feet and clings to the northern side of the Iceberg Peak in the heart of the Beartooths. What's most unusual is that the Grasshopper Glacier contains millions of grasshoppers entombed in its ice, and many of the species are now extinct. Scientists believe that since grasshoppers tend to travel in large swarms, they just so happen to be migrating over this area when a severe storm hit, and thus trapped them in ice for all time. Some of the grasshopper remains found in the glacier are the Rocky Mountain locust, a now extinct species of grasshopper that was notorious for causing damage to crops in Kansas, Nebraska, Colorado, and other states throughout the 1800s. Swarms of locusts were so thick at times in the West, they were known to cause trains to come to a screaming halt. Massive swarm eradication efforts, as well as the destruction of their habitat by farming and ranching, eventually led to their demise. The last recorded sighting of the Rocky Mountain locust was in Canada in 1902. Only the most determined hikers ever get to Grasshopper Glacier, and typically only from late July through early September.